3 facts. Drop an apple and it falls. Steer a starbeam past the sun and it bends. Eddington measured that bend in 1919, and it was twice what a mere pull on a clock would give. And in 2017, 2 neutron stars collided, and the ripple of that merger arrived within a second and a half of its own flash of light after traveling 130 million years. 3 facts, 1 demand. Whatever gravity is, it must be a field that moves. It must bend light as strongly as it slows clocks, and its waves must race photons to 15 decimal places. So today this substrate goes in the dock, and we ask 4 questions in order. Does it move? What source is it? How far does it reach? And can it ever be Einstein's? The answers are yes, only the trace, 1 healing length, and only if you erase the lattice. Along the way 1 accusation gets dropped. This scalar does bend light by the full measured amount. But make no mistake about where this ends. We are going to convict. One thing before we begin. Advaita Chakra Theory is a speculative, exploratory framework, not established, peer-reviewed physics. Much of what follows is honest conjecture that still needs validation. Watch it in that spirit as ideas to test, argue with, and refute. Start by asking what field actually sets the clock rate. Write the substrate's order parameter in the obvious way: an amplitude times a phase. A matter mode gets its mass gap from the condensate amplitude, mass proportional to a vacuum expectation value, exactly as a Higgs mass does. So the clock rate is proportional to that amplitude, and the lapse, chapter 10's potential, is just the logarithmic fluctuation of it. Call that fluctuation sigma. The lapse is the dilaton. A region of lower amplitude has slower clocks, and that is a potential well. Now notice what has just happened, because it is the spine of this whole book asserting itself. There is 1 order parameter. Its compact phase gave the massless goldstone that became the photon. Its amplitude gives gravity. 1 substrate, 1 order parameter. The phase carries light, the amplitude partner carries weight. That identification is standard condensate physics, and we tag it standard. What is not standard is that this amplitude field has an equation derived from the substrate, and you can read gravity's entire character straight off it. Here is the derivation, and it is short. The long wavelength limit of the locked substrate is a relativistic Gross-Pityvskaya equation for the order parameter, with a self-coupling fixed by the on-site locking. Split it into modulus and phase, keep the amplitude channel, and you get an exact amplitude equation whose right-hand side is built entirely from matter phase gradients. Call that combination the matter kinetic scalar. Now linearize about the locked vacuum. The left side produces a mass term, the right side is the matter source, and what falls out is a massive wave equation for the lapse. That single line contains everything. The mass is twice the self-coupling. The propagation speed is the emergent light speed, and the source is the matter kinetic scalar. All 3 descend from the Gross-Pityvskaya equation, which is itself the coarse-grained image of the rotor Hamiltonian, derived not posited. So, question 1, does it move? It is a wave equation. The lapse propagates at the emergent light speed. The kinematic only suspect, gravity as a fixed backdrop, with no equation of its own, an analog that merely relabels a coordinate chart, is eliminated. And does it gravitate on itself? Expand the potential about the locked vacuum, and you find a sigma-squared term sitting there, a cubic self-interaction. The lapse source is the lapse. That is the qualitative hallmark of a real theory of gravity. So far the suspect walks and talks like gravity. Question 2, and this is where the case turns. Everything depends on what the source actually is, so evaluate it on shell. For massless matter radiation, the dispersion is omega equals ck, and when you substitute that in, the source vanishes. Identically, radiation is traceless and does not source the lapse at all. For massive matter, with a gap, the dispersion has that extra term, and the source comes out equal to the mass over c squared. Positive. Massive matter sources the lapse, so the lapse couples to the trace of the stress-energy tensor, to mass, not to the energy of radiation, and that is not a small technical departure. That is precisely the source structure of Nordström's scalar gravity, the theory Einstein and Fokker cast in geometric form in 1914, and that history then discarded. On this dynamics, radiation does not gravitate. A universe of pure radiation would feel no self-gravity whatsoever. That is the defect that killed Nordström cosmology, and chapter 13 inherits it in full. Now the accusation that gets dropped, and it matters because it is the one everybody expects to stick. Nordström's theory died at the 1919 eclipse. Its metric is conformally flat, which means its spatial and temporal perturbations carry the same sign. Null geodesics are conformally invariant, so its Eddington parameter is -1 and light is not deflected at all. Not less than Einstein, not at all. So does the ACT scalar inherit that? No. And the reason is the protected identity from chapter 10. 1. Condensatives, both are couplings, the stiffness and the locking both go as amplitude squared, so the change in the log of the light speed and the change in the log of the clock rate are the same number, sigma. Write the emergent line element out and the perturbations enter the time part and the space part with opposite signs. Compare that against the standard post-Newtonian form and you can read gamma straight off. Gamma equals 1. The general relativistic value. The full Eddington deflection. So the honest statement is neither ACT is Nordström nor ACT is general relativity. It is Nordström's source, Einstein's gamma. Light bends by the measured amount. What departs from Einstein is what gravitates, not how light bends. Question 3, and this is the deepest of the failures. The lapse is massive. That mass term was sitting in the wave equation from the start. And the substrate pins the self-coupling to the gap, so the dilaton mass is just the gap frequency over the light speed, which means the force is Yukawa screened, with a range equal to the light speed over the gap frequency, the microscopic healing length of the condensate. Put numbers on it. In substrate units, gap frequencies of 1, 5 and 20 give ranges of 1, 0.2 and 0.05. The harder the vacuum locks, the shorter the range monotonically, and it never reaches the axis. There is no regime in which a locked vacuum yields an infinite range force. Real gravity is long range because the graviton is massless. The ACT dilaton is generically massive because the amplitude mode is gapped by the very symmetry breaking potential that locks the vacuum in the first place. And notice the coincidence, because we come back to it, the same locking that gives matter its mass gives the lapse its mass. Nordström died because it is a scalar. To couple to the full stress tensor rather than only its trace, gravity has to be carried by a spin-2 field. So can this substrate host an emergent, massless, spin-2 graviton as a collective mode? There is a wall in the way, and it is a theorem. Weinberg and Witten, 1980, a quantum field theory with a Lorentz covariant, conserved stress-energy tensor, admits no massless particle of spin greater than 1. That theorem is the obstruction to emergent gravity. You cannot build a massless graviton out of an ordinary Lorentz invariant medium, but look at its premise. It needs a covariant stress tensor on the emergent spacetime, and that premise fails here, because Lorentz invariance in this theory is emergent, not fundamental. The substrate has a preferred rest frame, the lattice, and the stress tensor is covariant only in the hydrodynamic limit, with corrections at order Ka0 squared. The premise is broken, the obstruction is evaded, and that is a genuine structural advantage. A Lorentz invariant emergent gravity attempt is flatly forbidden, and this one is not. The loophole is the lattice, but how a theory evades that theorem dictates what its graviton is. Count polarizations by the little group of the preferred frame. Exact Lorentz gives you 2, a massive spin 2 gives 5, and a massless spin 2 with broken Lorentz gives 2 tensor modes plus an extra scalar, the Horava-Lifshitz Einstein ether class. And here the two frontiers of this corpus fuse. That extra scalar the counting demands is the same field as the dilaton we derived from the amplitude equation. One found it dynamically, the other found it by counting one mode, and it is what stands between this theory and general relativity. So state exactly what clean general relativity would demand, as two symmetries. A massless spin 2 is protected only by local diffeomorphism invariance. That is what removes the graviton mass and cuts 5 polarizations down to 2. And a sterile massless dilaton, one that does not couple to the trace, is protected only by local Weyl invariance. Clean GR needs both. Now interrogate the two scales that define this vacuum. First, the on-site locking sets a fixed frequency scale, the mass gap. Any fixed scale breaks scale invariance explicitly, and that is exactly what gives the dilaton its mass. To make it massless, you must send the locking to 0, the unlocking transition, at which the gap closes and every matter mass goes to 0 with it. No atoms. Second, diffeomorphism invariance requires no background structure, but the lattice is background, a rigid set of sites at a fixed spacing, a preferred frame. Under a would-be local diffeomorphism, the kinetic tensor shifts at order Ka0 squared, which is precisely the dispersion correction. Read that backwards, and it is devastating. The same lattice term that lets the emergent spin 2 exist is the term that gives it a mass and a residual scalar. The evasion and the pathology are the same term. To make it massless, you must send the spacing to 0, no lattice, no loophole. Put the two together and you have the headline of part 3. Both symmetries are broken by the two constants that define the vacuum at exactly the order that produces the pathology. That is the dichotomy theorem, and it is a no-go. A locked lattice cannot host a massless spin-2 graviton with a decoupled scalar. Its gravity is necessarily Lorentz-violating scalar tensor gravity. Recovering Einstein requires killing the locking, which removes all matter, or killing the lattice, which removes the theory. ACT as a discrete substrate and ACT as general relativity are mutually exclusive. Verdict. On the first count, is it dynamical? Guilty, and that is a point in its favor. The lapse obeys a wave equation, propagates at the emergent light speed, and gravitates on itself. On the second, what does its source? Only the trace. Radiation does not gravitate, and that is Nordström's defect, inherited. On the third, light bending, acquitted. Gamma equals 1, protected by one order parameter driving the cone and the clock together. On the fourth, is it Einstein's? No, and not as a matter of insufficient effort, as a theorem. Now the honest frontier, because the theorem is a statement about this Hamiltonian, not about all conceivable substrates. There is one logical escape, an accidental, emergent gauge symmetry of string net type, where helicity 2 structure emerges as a collective excitation, protected by a symmetry that is not microscopic. That would need a different microscopic model. The stated Hamiltonian produces abelian goldstones and a scalar strain, not a tensor gauge field, and it would still have to unify the graviton and photon cones to 15 decimal places. No such construction exists in this corpus. So the verdict stands, and it is a result rather than a defeat. This is a genuine emergent theory of a Lorentz-violating, ether-class gravity, with the right deflection and the wrong source. And its own discreteness is exactly why it is not Einstein's. Next, we take this verdict to cosmology and watch what a trace-only source does to an expanding universe. A word of acknowledgement. This work was inspired in part by the non-dual teachings of Sri Narayana Guru, that the creator, the creation, and the substance of creation are fundamentally one. Symbols from the Hindu tradition, the Sudarshan chakra and the Shivalinga, suggested the analogies behind the chakra model. They are acknowledged as philosophical and symbolic inspiration. The physics stands on its own. Thank you for watching. If this made you think, the book and the next chapter are linked below. Until then, one substance and how far it reaches.